My name is Elara Monroe, and I was 21 years old when my father decided I was no longer his daughter. The sentence itself still feels unreal when I think it. As if a relationship that had defined every moment of my existence could be terminated with a few sharp words, like canceling a subscription that no longer felt useful. He didn't raise his voice. That's the part people never understand when I tell this story. If he had screamed, if he had raged, if he had thrown something, I might have been able to forgive him one day. Anger can be temporary. Anger can be blamed on emotion, but what my father did was worse. He was calm. We were sitting at the long oak dining table in the house I grew up in, the one on Crestwood Lane where every surface was polished and every emotion was swallowed. The chandelier above us cast a warm yellow light that made everything look softer than it actually was. My plate was untouched. Chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes. My stomach had been in knots all day, and now it felt like it had sealed itself shut completely. My mother sat across from me, posture perfect, hands folded neatly in her lap. My father sat at the head of the table like he always did, back straight, expression neutral. The man who built an entire logistics company from the ground up. The man everyone in our town admired. The man who had spent my entire childhood reminding me that love was conditional. I had practiced the words in my head all afternoon. I'm pregnant. 3 words. That's all it took to destroy everything. When I finally said them, my voice came out quieter than I intended, almost apologetic, as if I had committed a crime instead of stating a fact. For a moment, no one spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching out like it was daring someone to react. My father blinked once. "Say that again," he said. I did. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at him. She just stared at the plate in front of her, like the mashed potatoes might suddenly reveal instructions on how to disappear. My father leaned back in his chair slowly, his fingers steepled together. I knew that posture. It was the same one he used in board meetings, the same one he used when employees disappointed him. "How long have you known?" he asked. "A few weeks. And the father," I swallowed. "His name is Daniel." That was a lie. I don't know why I lied in that moment. Maybe instinct, maybe fear. Maybe I was still trying, even then, to protect something that didn't deserve protection. My father nodded once, absorbing the information like it was a bad quarterly report. "Is he wealthy?" he asked. "No. Married? No. Useful?" That word hit harder than any insult. "I love him," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. That's when my father sighed. Not angrily, not dramatically, tiredly, as if I had exhausted him. "Elara," he said, "do you have any idea how much I have invested in you?" I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't about me. It never had been. He began listing things. My education, the internships he arranged, the connections he pulled strings for, the expectations he had carefully constructed for my future. "You were supposed to go to law school," he continued. "You were supposed to marry someone appropriate, someone who would strengthen this family." My mother remained silent. I looked at her. I needed her to say something. Anything. She didn't. "And now," my father said calmly, "you come into my house and tell me you're pregnant out of wedlock by a man with nothing to offer." I opened my mouth to defend myself. He raised his hand. "No," he said. "You've said enough." He stood up, pushing his chair back gently. The scrape of wood against hardwood sounded deafening. "You are the biggest mistake I have ever made," he said. The words landed cleanly, surgically. "I tried to shape you into something worthwhile," he continued, "and you've proven quite thoroughly that you're incapable of that." My vision blurred. "I won't have this embarrassment attached to my name," he said. "Pack your things, you have 1 hour. After that, you're no longer welcome in this house." I stared at him, waiting for something, anger, hesitation, regret. There was none. I turned to my mother. "Mom," I whispered. She didn't look up. The clock kept ticking. That hour passed in fragments. I remember standing in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by trophies and certificates that suddenly felt meaningless. Debate awards. Academic plaques. Evidence of a lifetime spent trying to earn something that was never going to be given freely. I packed clothes first, practical things. I left behind the framed photos, the books, the childhood keepsakes. They felt like relics from someone else's life. At one point, I paused in front of the mirror. I barely recognized myself. By the time I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, the television was on. A game show played in the background. My mother sat on the couch, hands folded, eyes fixed on the screen. She didn't stand up. She didn't hug me. She didn't say goodbye. My father didn't even come into the room. When I stepped outside, the evening air felt sharp and cold, even though it was early spring. I stood on the driveway for a moment, looking back at the house that had defined my entire existence. Then I turned away. I sat in my car and cried until my chest hurt. Then I reached for my phone. I called Marcus, straight to voicemail. I called again and again. On the fourth try, he picked up. "Elara," he said, distracted. "What's wrong?" "They kicked me out," I said. "I'm pregnant." I told them I don't have anywhere to go. There was silence on the line, then he exhaled slowly. "Listen," he said, "this is a lot. I wasn't expecting this tonight. I just need you," I said. "Please?" "I'll call you back," he replied. He never did. I sat in that car until the sky went dark, my phone glowing uselessly in my hand, my entire future collapsing in slow motion. By the time I drove away, I was no longer someone's daughter. I was no longer someone's plan. I was alone, pregnant, and homeless, and I had no idea that this was only the beginning. The first night after you lose everything is the strangest. You expect hysteria, screaming, complete emotional collapse. What you get instead is numbness. I drove aimlessly for almost an hour, stopping only when the gas light flickered on. I pulled into the far corner of a grocery store parking lot, turned off the engine, and just sat there with my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. I was 21 years old, pregnant, disowned, and I had no idea where I was going to sleep. My phone buzzed once. My heart jumped so hard it hurt. "Marcus, I'm sorry, I can't do this. Please don't contact me again." That was it. No explanation, no questions, no acknowledgement that there was a child growing inside me. Just a clean severing, like cutting a loose thread and pretending it had never been attached to anything important. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I was going to scream so loudly someone would call the police. I slept in my car that night. Curled up in the back seat with a jacket for a pillow, doors locked, every unfamiliar sound sending a jolt of panic through my body. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere nearby, a cart collector whistled while doing his rounds. I remember thinking, so this is it. This is how fast a life can unravel. In the morning, I washed my face in the grocery store bathroom and tried to make myself look human again. My eyes were swollen. My hands shook as I drank water from the sink. I checked my bank account. $912.43. That was everything I had to my name. I called every friend I thought I had. Some didn't answer. Some said they were sorry but couldn't help. One said her parents wouldn't allow it. Another said she didn't want to get involved. In less than 12 hours, I learned how thin most relationships really are when you stop being convenient. By noon, desperation set in. I searched online for rooms to rent, boarding houses, short-term sublets, anything that didn't require references or credit checks. That's how I found the place on North Elm Street. The ad was short, room for rent, cash only, no questions. I should have known. The house was old, sagging in places like it had given up trying to look respectable. The porch railing was loose, the paint peeled in long strips. The air smelled faintly of mildew and cigarettes. The landlord, a man who didn't bother telling me his name, looked me up and down, lingering on my stomach like it offended him. "$60 a week," he said. "Bathrooms shared. Kitchen, too. You keep to yourself, we won't have problems." I nodded. I handed over the cash. That night, I lay on a mattress so thin I could feel the springs pressing into my back. The ceiling above me was stained with old water damage. Someone down the hall argued loudly on the phone. A door slammed. Music blared. I pressed a hand to my stomach. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm doing the best I can. Morning came quickly. Survival doesn't give you time to grieve. I needed work, immediately. I took the first job that would have me, early mornings at a bakery, arriving before sunrise to shape dough and load ovens. The owner didn't ask questions. He just told me to show up on time and keep my mouth shut. I took a second job at a dry cleaner in the afternoons. The heat from the presses made my head spin. My feet ached constantly. At night, I worked at a call center, reading scripts to strangers who yelled at me for things I had no control over. 3 jobs, 7 days a week. I ate whatever was cheapest. Ramen, rice. Bananas when they were on sale. I learned quickly which foods stretched the furthest and which ones left me nauseous for hours. Morning sickness hit hard. Some days, I threw up in the bakery bathroom between shifts and went right back to work like nothing happened. Other days, I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood just to keep from gagging while pressing someone else's clothes. I didn't tell anyone I was pregnant. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew what would happen. They would see me as a liability, and liabilities don't get scheduled. Weeks blurred together. My body grew heavier, slower, more tired. At night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the boarding house and wondered how my parents were sleeping so peacefully without me. I wondered if my mother ever thought of me at all. At 6 months pregnant, my body finally gave out. It happened at the call center. I remember standing up from my chair and feeling dizzy. The room tilted. My vision tunneled. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, fluorescent lights blinding above me, voices shouting my name. I woke up in a hospital bed. A doctor stood at my side, arms crossed, expression severe. "You're running on fumes," he said. "You're dehydrated, exhausted, and pushing yourself far past what's safe." "I can't stop working," I said immediately. Panic surged through me. "I need the money." "If you don't slow down," he replied, "you're going to lose this baby." That sentence knocked the air out of me. I quit 2 jobs the next day. I cried while doing it. I survived on the bakery income, government assistance, and a level of anxiety that sat in my chest like a second heartbeat. When my daughter was born, the room was quiet. No pacing father. No grandparents in the hallway, no balloons or flowers, just me. The nurse asked if family was coming. I said they were out of town. It was easier than telling the truth. I named her Lyra. Because stars are born in darkness. Holding her for the first time rewired something inside me. All the fear, the exhaustion, the bitterness, it didn't disappear, but it shifted. She needed me. And I would not fail her, even if the rest of the world already had. People romanticize survival like it builds character in a neat, inspirational way. It doesn't. Survival strips you down to the rawest version of yourself. It takes every illusion you ever had about fairness, safety, or rescue and burns it away until all that's left is instinct. Lyra and I lived in that boarding house for almost 2 years. The room was barely big enough for a crib, a dresser I found on the curb, and a twin mattress on the floor. In winter, cold crept in through the cracks around the window frame. In summer, the heat pressed down like a punishment. I learned how to roll towels and stuff them into gaps, how to layer blankets, how to make do. Every dollar had a destination before it ever reached my hands. Rent, diapers, formula, bus fare. Food came last, always last. I became an expert at stretching nothing into something. Rice and beans. Oatmeal 3 meals a day. Eggs when I could afford them. I learned the exact hour the grocery store marked down bread and bruised produce. I knew which cashiers would look the other way if I was a few cents short. Some nights, I ate after Lyra fell asleep, sitting on the floor with the lights off, chewing quietly so I wouldn't wake her. Other nights, I told myself I wasn't hungry and went to bed early. Hunger does something strange to your mind. It makes you sharp and dull at the same time, focused on immediate needs, incapable of imagining a future beyond the next week. The bakery job became my lifeline. I showed up every day before dawn, hair pulled back, eyes heavy but determined. I never complained. I never asked for time off. I worked faster than anyone else, learned every station, memorized every routine. Eventually, the owner trusted me with more responsibility, not because he cared, but because I was useful. That was fine. I had learned long ago that usefulness was often mistaken for worth. I didn't need his approval. I needed the paycheck. Lyra grew quickly. She was a quiet baby at first, observant, eyes following everything. Then she became curious, then stubborn, then joyful in a way that felt almost defiant. She smiled at strangers, laughed at ceiling fans, clapped her hands when I sang to her, even though I was always off-key. Some nights, when exhaustion threatened to pull me under completely, I would lie next to her crib and watch her breathe. That simple rise and fall grounded me, reminded me why quitting was not an option. I did not reach out to my parents. Not once. Pride played a role, but it wasn't the main reason. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. I was afraid they would say no again, and I couldn't survive that a second time. I did hear things, though, through distant relatives, through people who still lived in my hometown and talked too much. My father told everyone I was unstable, that I had made reckless choices, that he had tried to help me but I refused guidance. I had been rewritten into a cautionary tale, and my mother, she said nothing, again. On Lyra's first birthday, I bought a tiny cake from the discount rack. The frosting was uneven, one corner dented where someone had dropped it. I stuck a single candle in the center, just one. I sang softly while she stared at the flame like it was magic. There were no pictures taken by doting grandparents, no gifts, no party hats. But when she smashed her hands into the frosting and laughed, something inside me cracked open. I realized I had two choices. I could let bitterness hollow me out, or I could let hunger sharpen me. That decision didn't transform my life overnight, but it changed the direction of it. Around that time, I met Evelyn Ruiz. She was 67, widowed, sharp-tongued, and ran a small property management office 2 bus rides away from the boarding house. I applied for a receptionist job thinking it was a long shot. She hired me on the spot, not because my resume impressed her, but because I showed up early, answered her questions directly, and didn't flinch when she told me the job was hard. Evelyn noticed things. She noticed I caught accounting errors others missed, that I remembered tenants' names and problems, that I stayed late without being asked. One afternoon, she asked me why. "Why do you work like you're running from something?" she said. I didn't lie. "I'm running towards something," I replied. "I just don't know what it looks like yet." She nodded. From that day on, she started teaching me. Not gently, not kindly, but thoroughly. She taught me how buildings made money, how bad management destroyed good assets, how neighborhoods changed before the market noticed, how patience created leverage. I absorbed everything. I studied after Lyra went to sleep. Notes spread across the floor, highlighters running dry. Coffee reheated too many times. Some nights I cried quietly from exhaustion. Some nights I felt unstoppable. The voice of my father still lived in my head. "You're a mistake. You're not built for this. You'll fail," but another voice had started to grow louder. One that said, "Watch me." Evelyn Ruiz did not believe in potential. She believed in proof. "You don't get credit for what you might become," she told me one afternoon, sliding a stack of lease agreements across her desk. "You get credit for what you can execute when things are on fire." That was her philosophy. No motivational posters, no speeches about destiny, just results. Her office was small, cramped between a nail salon and a tax prep place. The carpet was worn thin, the furniture mismatched, the air always smelled faintly of burnt coffee. But inside those walls, I learned more about power and leverage than I ever had in my father's house. Evelyn ran her business with ruthless efficiency. Tenants tried to manipulate her. Contractors tried to overcharge her. City inspectors tried to intimidate her. She shut all of it down with a mix of preparation, calm authority, and an uncanny ability to remember every detail that mattered. She let me sit in on meetings. At first, I just listened. Then she asked me questions. "What do you see here? Where's the risk? Who has leverage in this situation?" I learned quickly, or I got corrected publicly. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't gentle either. And strangely, I thrived. For the first time in my life, someone wasn't trying to mold me into a version they needed. She was sharpening what was already there. I stayed at the boarding house longer than I wanted to. Even after I could technically afford better, fear kept me anchored. Fear of instability. Fear of jinxing the progress I had clawed my way toward. Eventually, Evelyn noticed. "You're living like someone who expects to lose everything again," she said bluntly. "That kind of thinking will keep you small." I moved into a modest, one-bedroom apartment 2 weeks later. The first night there, I sat on the floor with Lyra, surrounded by unpacked boxes, and cried, not from sadness, but from the strange grief of realizing how long I had lived in survival mode. Lyra was 2 by then. She followed me everywhere, asking endless questions, narrating her world in half-formed sentences. She loved windows, animals, and the color yellow. I loved her in a way that felt like it might split me open. Around that time, Evelyn handed me a challenge. A small, rundown rental property that was hemorrhaging money. Tenants constantly late on rent, maintenance neglected, paperwork in chaos. "I want you to fix this," she said. "Not theoretically, actually." I spent weeks immersed in it. I reorganized records, renegotiated contracts, addressed tenant concerns directly, set clear boundaries and consequences. I made mistakes. I learned from them. 3 months later, the property was profitable. Evelyn didn't congratulate me, she just nodded. "Good," she said. "Now you know you can do it." That was when she suggested I get my real estate license. I laughed at first. I didn't have money for classes, or time, or confidence. She stared at me like I was being stupid. "You already do the work," she said. "You might as well get paid for it." I studied at night. Early mornings, weekends. I failed my first practice exam. I cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes, then went back to studying. When I passed the actual licensing exam, I sat in my car and screamed. Not loudly, just enough to let something release. That certificate felt heavier than paper. It felt like proof that I was no longer just surviving. My first sale was a disaster. The condo smelled like cat urine and despair. The layout was awkward. It had been sitting on the market for months. I staged it myself with second-hand furniture, cleaned it top to bottom, baked cookies before every showing because I read somewhere it made people feel at home. It sold in 3 weeks. My commission was more money than I had ever held in my hands at once. I deposited the check and stared at the balance like it might disappear. That night, I bought Lyra a small toy and a book. She hugged me and said, "Mama happy." She wasn't wrong. Evelyn started treating me like a partner instead of an employee. She taught me about long-term vision, about thinking in decades instead of months, about choosing projects not just for profit, but for positioning. One evening, as we closed up the office, she said something that changed everything. "People who grow up with nothing either stay scared forever or become dangerous," she said. "You're the second kind." I didn't tell her what my father had called me. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, his voice wasn't the loudest one in my head anymore. Success doesn't arrive with fireworks. It creeps in quietly, almost suspiciously, like it's afraid you'll scare it away if you notice too soon. By the time Lyra turned 3, I was no longer counting coins at the grocery store. I wasn't wealthy, not even close, but I was stable. And after years of chaos, stability felt luxurious. I kept my life small on purpose. No social media, no flashy purchases, no announcements. Every extra dollar went into savings. Every lesson Evelyn taught me went into my mental toolbox. She pushed me harder the more competent I became. "Comfort is the enemy," she reminded me whenever I started to relax. "The moment you think you've arrived is the moment you stop paying attention." I took on listings no one else wanted. Condos in awkward locations, buildings with reputations, properties that had been passed over so many times they'd become invisible. I learned to see differently. Where others saw decay, I saw leverage. Where they saw risk, I saw opportunity. I asked better questions. I ran numbers obsessively. I negotiated relentlessly, not aggressively, relentlessly. That distinction mattered. At night, after Lyra fell asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with spreadsheets and notebooks, mapping out scenarios. Best case, worst case, most likely. I failed more than I succeeded at first. Deals fell apart, buyers backed out. Inspections revealed expensive surprises. Every failure hurt, but none of them broke me. Because I had already survived worse. The voice of my father still surfaced occasionally, especially when something went wrong. "You're in over your head. You don't belong in this world." I learned how to answer it, not with affirmations, with receipts, every closed deal, every profit margin. Every satisfied client chipped away at that voice until it sounded less like authority and more like static. Evelyn noticed my discipline. She started giving me access to higher-level conversations. Introduced me to developers, brought me into strategy meetings. One afternoon, she slid a folder across her desk. "This is mine," she said. "But I want you to analyze it." It was a neglected apartment building in a transitioning neighborhood. The numbers scared most people off: deferred maintenance, tenant turnover, city violations. I studied it for days, then I told her exactly how I'd fix it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she smiled. That alone made my heart race. "You're ready," she said. Ready was a terrifying word. I invested everything I had into that first serious project. Every savings dollar, every ounce of confidence. I barely slept during the renovation. I managed contractors, fought inspectors, handled tenant complaints, and learned more in 6 months than I had in the previous 3 years combined. There were moments I thought I had made a catastrophic mistake. Moments I stood alone in half-finished hallways, staring at peeling walls, wondering if this would be the thing that finally broke me. But it didn't. When the building stabilized and the numbers turned, something clicked. I wasn't just competent, I was good, very good. The profit wasn't enormous, but it was real, and it was mine. I didn't celebrate publicly. I took Lyra to the park, bought her ice cream, and watched her run with sticky hands and wild joy. That night, I pulled a drawing out of my wallet. A house. A giant yard. 2 stick figures holding hands. A promise I had made when she was too young to remember it. I folded it carefully and put it back. Because for the first time, that promise didn't feel impossible. There's a moment in every survivor's life when fear stops being the driving force. Not because it disappears, but because something stronger takes its place. For me, that moment came quietly, on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in Evelyn's office, reviewing a set of financial projections for a mixed-use property. She leaned back in her chair, studying me over the rim of her glasses. "You know," she said, "you don't need me anymore." The statement hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to argue. To deflect, to insist I still had more to learn. She waved it off. "That doesn't mean I'm abandoning you," she continued. "It means you've outgrown the need for permission." Permission. I had spent my entire life waiting for it. From my father, from institutions, from circumstances. Evelyn had never given it to me. She had taught me how to take it. Over the next year, my world expanded. I took on larger projects, riskier ones, deals that required confidence, not just competence. Money began to accumulate, not in a dramatic windfall, but in steady, undeniable increments. Savings turned into capital. Capital turned into leverage. I still lived modestly, still drove an old car. Still packed lunches, not out of scarcity, but out of intention. Power is easier to maintain when people underestimate you. Lyra was 4 when Marcus resurfaced. He sent a message on a social platform I barely used. "Hey, I've been thinking about you. I heard you're doing well." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I took screenshots. I didn't reply. 2 days later, he sent another message. "We should talk. It's about Lyra." That one almost worked. Almost. But I had learned to recognize manipulation dressed up as concern. I saved the message and blocked him. Later, I found out the real reason. He had married someone else, divorced her, lost a job, and now, conveniently, remembered the child he'd abandoned. He would never hear from me again. Around the same time, Evelyn announced she was retiring. She called me into her office and handed me a thick folder. "My clients," she said. At a discount. I tried to refuse. She glared at me. This is not charity, she snapped. This is succession. She handed me a bottle of champagne next. Don't open it until you make your first million, she said. I still have that bottle. I launched Monroe Holdings from a small rented office with one desk and a second-hand chair. I chose my projects carefully. I avoided attention. I let my work speak. My first major redevelopment project changed everything. A condemned building the city planned to demolish. Everyone else saw rubble. I saw structure. 18 months later, it was a modern residential space that sold out in weeks. The profit crossed 7 figures. I sat alone in my office afterward, staring at the numbers, waiting for the familiar surge of fear. It didn't come. Instead, there was calm. I had crossed an invisible line. I was no longer trying to prove I could survive. I was building something. And the most dangerous thing about me, I didn't need revenge. Success has a way of shaking loose the past. Not because you invite it, but because people start looking for you when your name begins to matter. I was 30 by the time Monroe Holdings became a name people recognized in quiet circles. Not flashy headlines, not magazine covers, just whispered respect in conference rooms and zoning meetings. The kind that opens doors without announcing itself. That was when the ghosts came back. First, it was old acquaintances. People who hadn't answered my calls when I was desperate suddenly remembered me fondly. Messages started with "I've been meaning to reach out" and ended with vague suggestions of coffee. I declined politely. Then came Marcus again. Different number, different platform, same energy. I think it's time we talked like adults. I blocked him without responding. Finally, the whispers reached my parents. I didn't hear it from them directly. I heard it through layers of separation, industry chatter, mutual connections, people who knew my father's name long before they knew mine. Hall Logistics was struggling, overextended, poorly positioned, stuck in old ways, contracts lost, loans tightened, reputation quietly fraying at the edges. I felt nothing when I heard. No joy, no anger, just distance. Around that time, I met Jonah Patel. He was an architect, quiet, thoughtful, divorced, with a young daughter close to Lyra's age. We met during a redevelopment project and worked together for months before anything personal happened. He never pushed, never rushed. He showed up when he said he would, remembered small details. Listened more than he spoke. Trust came slowly, but it came. Lyra liked him immediately. That mattered. By the time I allowed myself to call him my partner, my life looked nothing like the one I had been exiled from. And that was when the listing appeared. A historic estate, 6 bedrooms, acres of land. In my hometown, 3 miles from my parents' house. I told myself it was a good investment, the school district, the location, the potential, all true. But when I signed the papers, I smiled. Some decisions are strategic, some are symbolic. This was both. We moved in 2 weeks before Lyra's 9th birthday. The house was everything she had drawn years earlier, too big, too open, too full of light. She ran across the lawn barefoot, laughing, arms outstretched like she might take flight. That was when Ridgewood noticed. The whispers spread fast. Did you hear who bought Thornfield Estate? Hall's daughter, the one he disowned. Apparently she's loaded. I didn't think my parents knew. But secrets don't stay secret in small towns. Soon enough, the truth reached them. And with it, desperation. We didn't move into Thornfield Estate quietly. Not because I wanted attention, but because attention arrived whether I invited it or not. Trucks lined the drive for days. Contractors came and went. Designers walked the grounds with tablets and measuring tapes. I didn't over-renovate. I restored, preserved what mattered, improved what didn't. Money is loud when it's insecure. Mine was. Lyra started at Ridgewood Academy that fall. Tuition alone would have once sounded like a cruel joke. Now it was a line item. She wore her confidence like a second skin, curious, kind, unafraid. I watched her one morning through the iron gates as she ran toward her new friends, sunlight catching in her hair, and felt something settle deep in my chest. This was the point, not the house. Not the money, this. Monroe Holdings expanded carefully. I hired slow, promoted slower. built systems that didn't depend on me being everywhere at once. Developers started bringing me deals instead of the other way around. City officials returned my calls. Banks negotiated. Power had changed shape. It wasn't dominance. It was inevitability. Jonah moved in that winter. We blended routines before we blended lives, shared calendars, shared responsibilities, shared silence. His daughter, Maya, took longer to warm up. I let her. Some people need to arrive in their own time. By spring, she was leaving her shoes by the door like she belonged. The local paper ran a feature on Thornfield Estate. Tasteful, historical. No names attached, but my father read it, I know he did, because 2 days later his assistant called my office. Not him, never him. Mr. Hall would like to request a meeting, she said, voice carefully neutral. I smiled as I declined. Please let him know I don't take meetings without an agenda, I replied. He can email my office. There was a pause, then, of course, he emailed. The subject line was my name. The message was short, professional, almost respectful. He wanted advice about restructuring. About capital, about survival. I forwarded it to my legal team, then archived it. Weeks passed, then months. Then my mother wrote a letter, handwritten, delivered by courier. She apologized, sort of. She talked about family, regret, time. She didn't mention the night they sent me away. She didn't mention Lyra's birth. She didn't mention the years of silence. I placed the letter in a drawer and locked it. Not out of spite, out of clarity. You don't reopen doors just because someone knocks politely. The empire wasn't just Monroe Holdings. It was the life I had built, one rooted in choice, and I guarded it fiercely. The meeting happened on a Thursday. Not because I agreed to it, but because timing, leverage, and inevitability finally aligned. My father's company missed a critical payment. Word traveled faster than official notices ever do. Banks got nervous. Partners got quiet. The same men who once toasted his confidence now avoided his calls. And then, inevitably, he ran out of options. The email came from his personal address this time. No assistant, no buffer, just his name. He didn't ask for help, he asked to talk. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was unsure, but because I was curious. Curious about what he thought he could still say. I agreed to a meeting, at my office. At a time that worked for me. He arrived early. Of course he did. When my assistant buzzed to announce him, I didn't rush. I finished my call, signed the document in front of me, took a breath, then I stood. He looked older. Not dramatically, just thinner around the edges, shoulders slightly hunched. The sharp certainty I remembered had dulled into something brittle. He stood when I entered. Good. Thank you for seeing me, he said. I nodded once and gestured to the chair across from my desk. We sat. Silence stretched. I let it. Finally, he spoke. I didn't know, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't know what? How bad things were for you, he said. Back then. There it was, the revision, the softening of memory to make it survivable. I folded my hands calmly. You knew I was pregnant, I said. You knew you sent me away, you knew you cut me off. He swallowed. I thought you'd come back, he said. Apologize, do things properly. I almost laughed. Instead, I leaned back. Do you know how many nights I stayed awake wondering if my child would eat the next day? I asked, voice even. Do you know how many times I almost called you, and didn't because I remembered exactly what your love cost? His eyes dropped. Good. I didn't come here to argue, he said quietly. I came because I need help. There it was, not remorse, need, I nodded slowly. Then you came too late, I said. He looked up sharply. I can pay you, he said. Consulting fees, equity. Whatever you want, I stood. The meeting was over. I don't want anything from you, I said. And you don't get access to my life just because you're losing yours. He rose too, panic creeping into his voice. She's my granddaughter, he said. That word landed wrong. She has a name, I replied, and you forfeited the right to say it. I walked to the door and opened it. He hesitated, then turned back. You've become exactly what I wanted you to be, he said. I met his eyes. No, I said. I became what I needed to be. He left without another word. That night I went home and tucked Lyra into bed. She asked about my day. I told her it was productive. Because it was, closure doesn't arrive with apologies, it arrives with peace. The weeks after the meeting were quiet, not tense, not heavy, just still. Like the air after a storm that never quite broke. Hall Logistics filed for restructuring. Not bankruptcy, not salvation either, just a long, slow descent into irrelevance. I didn't follow the details closely. Some chapters don't need an epilogue. Lyra turned 10 that summer. We hosted her birthday on the back lawn at Thornfield Estate, yellow ribbons in the trees. A long table covered in art supplies, cupcakes, and lemonade. She ran barefoot with her friends, her laugh carrying across the grass. Jonah watched from the porch, Maya leaning against him, both of them smiling in that quiet, contented way that comes from belonging. Evelyn came too. She arrived in a sensible dress, surveyed the property with a single glance and nodded. "You did well," she said. From her, that meant everything. That night after the guests left and the house settled, Lyra curled up next to me on the couch. "Mom," she asked. "Yes, love." "Are we rich?" I smiled. "We're safe," I said. "And we're free." She considered that, then nodded, satisfied. Some truths don't need numbers. Months later, my mother wrote again. Another letter, longer this time, softer, more specific. I read it once, then I burned it in the fireplace, not in anger, in release. Forgiveness is not the same as access. I chose peace. Monroe Holdings continued to grow. I invested in projects that reflected my values: housing, community spaces, long-term impact. I mentored women who reminded me of myself once. Sharp, tired, underestimated. I never told them my whole story. I didn't need to. One evening, years later, I finally opened the champagne Evelyn had given me. Jonah raised his glass. "To the woman who built an empire," he said. I shook my head. "No," I said, "to the girl who survived long enough to become her." We clinked glasses. Outside, the estate was quiet, strong, rooted. And for the first time in my life, I knew, without doubt, that nothing could take this away from me. Because I hadn't won by destroying anyone. I had won by choosing myself.